Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today it is time to do the third to last 2024 UFL College Draft team recap, and we're going to be doing the Michigan Panthers today. The Michigan Panthers were the only other team to miss out in the championship game that made the playoffs naturally with the Battlehawks, but thanks to them beating them in week 1, they ended up getting the pick after them. So, while it did hurt them in a bit, the fact is the Panthers had a really good season this past year. They really didn't have many weaknesses on their roster. The issue was mainly injuries. Frank Gidna, Wes Hills, basically every quarterback getting hurt at different points in the season hurt them. And while they gave the Stallions a run for their money, in the end they weren't able to beat them. And so that's why they're picking 6th instead of 7th or 8th. Now, with them, there's a lot of things where it's also hard to say exactly what they need. They really didn't have a ton of weaknesses. Again, as we talked about the Battlehawks last time, and we will talk about, when you're in these playoff teams, there's really not much to say that we're bad about a team. So it's more like getting just the best talent rather than getting just, positions in need. So again, if you end up enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We still have 2 more teams to do. And without further ado, let's get started with their first round pick and the 6th overall pick, Julian Pearl, offensive tackle out of Illinois. Again, solid selection. This is like DC, you're making a huge move. You're getting an offensive lineman in the first round. Now, at Illinois, he played in 11 games all the last 3 years and higher in 2023. He was or is currently on the Ravens. You're getting an offensive lineman to help you out. Again, this is very similar. The first pick they had in the 2023 USFL College Draft was Jarrett Horst, an offensive lineman. They understand that offensive line is going to help them. And if you were to put any position as a weakness for them, it would probably be the offensive line, which wasn't all that great all year. So again, selecting an offensive lineman first round, I think that's a really smart decision. I think that overall it's a good pick. I think that, again, you could argue that some linemen are better than others, but I think that at the end of the day, you got one that you wanted. Clearly, that's why you drafted him in the first round. Not really too upset about this. Solid selection. Now, your second round pick was Dwight McLaughlin, cornerback out of Arkansas. Now, when you look at him, he's currently on the Vikings. He was a second-team All-SEC back in 2022. Now, he has played 4 years. He's kind of one of your classic college football players, freshman that didn't play a ton in sophomore, summer action, then junior and senior seasons. His sophomore or junior season was definitely his best, 52 total tackles, 4 interceptions. But this last year, while he had 30 less tackles, he did have 3 TFLs and 3 interceptions despite playing 4 less games. When you look at him, again, he helps you out. Cornerback was not as good as safety, I think a lot of people would say, just because of the talent you had at safety. But again, both their DB positions were, not the worst in the league. They were both solid. But again, you're helping that back end. I think this is a solid selection for that reason. Again, it's just like the Battlehawks. There's really not much you can do that's wrong unless you draft in a position that's super strong multiple times. So again, just like the Battlehawks, is one of the selections, just a solid selection. You got a good player to help you out. Good decision. Now, their third round pick was Isaac Okwu. Now, when you look at him, Isaac is one of those guys who's a defensive end out of Ole Miss. Again, he is back to that, you're drafting to a position that you're good at. Now, while they're not like omega deep, they are pretty deep in defensive line, not super deep. So this is a guy that can help you out there. Now, in James Madison, he had 7.5 sacks in the Sun Belt Conference in 2022. Then he went to Ole Miss. He had 3.5 sacks, 4.5 TFLs. So even though he went to tougher competition, he still put up good numbers, just not as good as he did at James Madison, but still good numbers. He is currently on the Detroit Lions. Naturally, Michigan Panthers, Detroit Lions. We saw it with Jake Bates go to the Detroit Lions. So it could be a similar story there, getting a guy that's more local. Getting local guys we talked about is always a good thing as well. The fans are more likely to know who they are. Fans are more likely to care. And of course, if the player like Isaac is already with the Lions, if he gets released, he could say, I don't really want to leave Detroit. Let's go to the Michigan Panthers. Solid selection. Now, the fourth round pick was Brian Dooley, another offensive lineman. He is from the Tennessee Titans. He played at Eastern Michigan. So yes, an EMU player. Again, Michigan, I mean, it's a smart decision. You're getting another local guy. This guy's been in Michigan for a long time now. 6 years of his life he was there. So if he doesn't, make it in the NFL, he can just go back to Michigan and play for the Panthers. Solid selection in that regard. He did play, 13 games, or basically played a full season in 4 of his 6 years at EMU in the MAC. So I think this is a really solid selection for that reason. Again, you're helping your O-line, which was your more weak area of your team. Good pick. Now, they did draft a quarterback in Rocky Lombardi in the 5th round out of MSU, Michigan State University, and Northern Illinois. This is one of those where, unlike a lot of the other quarterbacks, people were like, oh, that's a good decision. A lot of people were not too happy with the Rocky Lombardi selection. Now, statistically, it's not like he really did all that much. 11 TDs to 7 interceptions on a sub 60 completion percentage your last year in college in the MAC conference is not necessarily a good thing. Then it's not like he really played a ton at MSU, but when he did, it's not like he was incredible. 3 for 3 TD interception his freshman year. Then he was 8 to 9 in his junior year there. It's just, in terms of QBs, yeah, there were better QBs taken in this draft. I'm going to admit it. Now, he is on the Bengals, and again, it could be just some people saying he's not that great and all that. I get selecting a quarterback. You did have 4 different QBs play, which all had various degrees of hype ahead of them playing, and all ended up looking good at some point. But again, this is probably one of their weaker selections. This is one of the weaker QBs taken in the draft, a lot of people would agree with. But it's still not a terrible pick. I mean, you did see a lot of injuries happen. Who knows if everybody comes back playing? Who knows if they come back playing the same way they did last year? Not a horrid pick, but definitely not a great one. Now, their next selection was Dayton Wade in the 6th round. This was a really shocking one in a sense of getting a receiver at this point in the draft. I don't believe any other team had actually picked a receiver up until this point, which was crazy. But as for him, his last year in college, he put up 800 receiving yards with Ole Miss, 55 total receptions that year. A really solid player, all things considered. And again, you were able to get basically like a first pick or wide receiver. So in that regard, it's just a good decision. He's on the Ravens currently. We'll see if he makes the roster. This is a good selection. Wide receiver, you just lost Marcus Sims to the NFL. So getting somebody else to help you in that regard is going to help you out. So, solid pick here. Now, your 7th round pick was Akeem Dent out of FSU, position safety. FSU, again, we talked about before, had a great season this past year. Some people view they got robbed from a championship game opportunity or a playoff opportunity. They played in a lot of games basically every year at FSU. This past 3 years, he was essentially the same player, which is a good thing. 44 plus tackles, 0.5 plus TFLs, and half a sack 2 different years. Really solid player, again, helps you out in your DB room. Making that area just stronger is a smart decision, so I like this pick. Now, their 8th round selection was Andrew Meyer, center or offensive lineman out of UTEP. Now, when you look at him, this is somebody who was an All-Conference USA honorable mention a couple of years, was an academic honor roll and all that every year, so this is a smart guy and all that. He did play a lot of games and is currently on the Dolphins, but again, is somebody that's going to help you out a lot. When you look at him, again, it's another offensive lineman pick that was an area of need. Not much to say, but aside from that, it's just a good pick. Now, you picked another offensive lineman in the 9th round, another Michigan guy in Michigan State's J.D. Duplain. Now, when you look at him, this is somebody who was a letter winner, and he played 47 career games, and 42 of those were straight. Now, his 47 starts are the second most in MSU history by an O-lineman, and his 42 consecutive starts is also second in school history. So when you look at him, I mean, not much to be upset about. I mean, an honorable All-Big Ten selection a bunch of times. He did graduate with a degree. But again, the most important thing is that, he played a lot at an offensive line position in Michigan. Again, somebody else who currently is not on an NFL roster. Very good shot he plays for the Michigan Panthers. Going to help their O-line. Great pick. Then their last pick was Isaiah Stallbird, linebacker / safety. When you look at what he did in his entire career, I mean, he played like Nebraska and SDSU, another SDSU selection. Had basically really solid numbers every year at SDSU. 70 tackles, 55 tackles, 80 tackles his last 3 years. 5.5, 3.5, 6.5 TFLs, and had 3 sacks his last year. A guy who, again, multiple places have had him as a linebacker. Some have had him as a safety. So if you can have a guy that can help you out in multiple areas, that's really good. Again, a solid selection. You're helping shore up that back end. Or if you want to put him at linebacker, in case Gidna comes back and needs time to, get better, saying that, Stallbird would be able to play this upcoming year. Solid selection. Now, their overall draft grade, I'm giving it an A-. I think this is basically as good as the Renegades draft. Again, just like the Renegades draft is really, the difference is I think that their questionable pick is more questionable, and that's, of course, the Rocky Lombardi selection. I think that all in all, I think their draft overall, when you look at the amount of good selections, I think it's better than Arlington, but the one that wasn't a good selection is a very questionable one, right? The Rocky Lombardi selection is just a really weird one. Again, you had 4 QBs play well for you. This is not DC who, failed to see action, or Arlington who just didn't get a chance to. With Michigan, you had multiple guys get action. So you're saying let's draft a QB when the odds that you don't have 2 of these guys, whether it be Perkins and Etling, whether it be Perkins and Perry, you're going to have 2 of those guys at least next year. So I think that was a very questionable selection. That drags them down from an A or an A+ to an A-. Because of that selection, I think the other picks are solid. So all in all, A-. So that'll do it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. As I still have 2 more teams to do. So be on the lookout for those. And as always, guys, have a great night.